profile. We also have a look at the alternate perspective and what that means and why that's important. In other words, how others perceive the individual as well as how the individual perceives themselves, which can be different in some cases or in many cases. And we'll also look more at the business persona types, how that can be used in a team dynamic, or why the mix of BP types is important in team dynamics. We'll also touch on behaviour in terms of appetite for risk-taking, learning style, motivation, leadership styles, and transactional analysis, which can all be related back to your behavioural persona. At the end, we will take questions, or indeed we'll take questions via IM all the way through the webinar. So if you'd like to drop a question on the IM, then CJ will pick those up and hand them to us at the end of the session before we wrap up. By way of further introduction, we have two people from Riddlebox here. Firstly, Nick Draycott. Nick is the marketing director of Riddlebox, and he will be delivering the majority of the presentation. He's a discoverer, by the way. More of that later. And we have Jeremy Moore here, who's one of the co-founders of Riddlebox, who's a hero.
Well, good morning. Thank you.
So more of that later. In terms of questions, as I said, we'll take those and we'll answer as many as we can at the end. Being an explorer, of course, I will make sure that we wrap up promptly by 9:15 and you'll be ready to go to your next meeting. Behaviourally, it's impossible for me to go over 9:15. So, and lastly, before I hand over to Nick, there is a slide deck which we'll be following through. We will post that slide deck up onto our web pages after the session, and we'll also send it to you so you have a copy of that to refer to. So with all of that, I will hand over to Nick.
Nick. Morning. Let me start by telling you something about Riddlebox. Our website summarises what we do by saying that we help leaders understand the dynamics between strategy, employee and customer experience to create outstanding performance. In essence, that means we're about measuring and improving the working experience of employees so that they can maximise their performance for their own benefits and ultimately for the benefit of the business that they're in. The business persona profiling, which we're going to talk about this morning, is actually part of a toolkit created by the founders of Riddlebox, Jeremy and Ram, and is the result of well over 8 years of detailed research, development and trialling. So basically, to summarise what Riddlebox is all about, it's that we're trying to take people who look like this. We're trying to get on to the next slide. Yeah, people who look like this to people who look like this. And to achieve this, we undertake our 4-stage process, which can be summarised as aims. You can see at the bottom of your screen. So we assess the existing workforce and their environment, improve what's there, measure what's going on, and sustain the improvement. During the course of this webinar, we'll touch on all 4 stages, but obviously concentrate mainly on stages 1 and 2, because frankly, that's all we're going to have time for. So this is what we're starting with. Yeah, we're back to our group of employees who are clearly dissatisfied with their lot. We can assume that they're completely demotivated, they don't enjoy what they're doing, and for that reason, they're unlikely to be giving of their best. And the knock-on consequences of which is that the company is probably not doing very well either. So if we're trying to understand why they're so unhappy and demotivated, we need to know more about them. And one of the approaches that we could adopt is to undertake something like Myers Briggs profiling, or something similar like 360, Hogan or Belbin. As you all probably know, these are well-established methodologies which characterize individuals according to certain attitudes, strengths, weaknesses, and various other criteria. All these profiling systems have their advocates and all their pluses and minuses. For instance, it's not uncommon to read about people who have had Myers Briggs profiling carried out at different times, which have produced different results. Without going into too much detail, one of the primary reasons for such anomalies is because the circumstances surrounding the individuals at the time they were assessed and profiled could be significantly different, to such an extent that the resulting profiles turn out to be different as well. The issue here is that traditional profiling systems don't really accommodate these external influences. They can be a bit prescriptive and restrictive, and of course people do change their behaviour, and that's not really what these systems are designed to show. In summary, traditional profiling is assessing what people are thinking and how they're behaving, and ignoring what they are feeling, in other words, what their emotional state is. And as we all know, it's emotion that drives our decision making. We use reason and rationale to justify the decision, but the prime driver is emotion. I realise I'm generalising here, and obviously we're quite happy to get into a technical discussion about the various methodologies for profiling. And some of you may know that Jez and Ram have written numerous white papers and articles on this, and in fact Ram's PhD encompassed the subject in great detail. But this webinar is not the place to discuss that sort of minutiae. Now, ladies and gentlemen, please don't misunderstand me. I'm not trying to decry Myers-Briggs, far from it. When it burst onto the scene, it was a revolutionary concept, and the first time provided a form of empirical measure of people's personalities which hadn't existed before. And very powerful it was too. It reminds me of the scene from 2001: A Space Odyssey, representing the dawn of man, if you remember it, where the apes wake up to see the monolith, the likes of which they've never seen before. But then, in my opinion, the next scene is just as important, showing the sun rising over the monolith, and we then watch the apes, all early humans, develop. And I think that's effectively what's happening here. Understanding the human mind, or if you like, the human brain, is constantly evolving, particularly with regard to the relationship which Dave touched on between psychology and neuroscience. Let me try and explain. If you think of the human brain as a computer, psychology would be the software and neuroscience would be the hardware. They're obviously interlinked, and you can't get the whole picture by looking at them in isolation. And having a better understanding of the relationship between neuroscience and psychology means that we're much more equipped now to understand our emotional state as opposed to just our rational one. It's more about how we feel rather than how we think. That's very important because, as I mentioned before, it's our emotion that will win over thought every time. We make decisions based on our emotions rather than our rational thoughts, but we use our rational thought and justify those decisions. Which is why, for instance, successful advertising appeals to our emotional state rather than our rational one. If you look at most car ads, the emphasis tends to be on the lifestyle surrounding the drivers rather than any particular features of the cars themselves. And I was watching the telly the other night and saw the Lloyd's Bank commercial, which showed a black horse galloping in slow motion through a hospital ward with a mother looking lovingly at her baby. Obviously, it had nothing to do with the bank, but was designed to appeal to us on an emotional level. Equally, you can probably argue that the success of Donald Trump in America and the Brexit campaign over here was essentially the triumph of emotion over rational thought. Slogans like "Make America Great Again" and "Take Back Control" were designed to appeal to us on an emotional rather than purely rational level. And it's worth noting that if the pollsters had been a bit bit more clued into the emotional state of the electorate, they might have been a bit nearer the mark in predicting the outcome. So basically, we need to understand how people feel as well as how they think, because how they feel is more likely to dictate their actions, which is where traditional profiling, like Myers Briggs, is vulnerable. So to address this, we've developed a new form of profiling called business persona. It's been designed to provide an unbiased view to help individuals understand what drives them, what shapes their thinking and their behaviours, and as a result will help people realise their full potential. Now, a huge amount of research and development and analysis has gone into this. I think I mentioned before that it's taken well over 8 years to get there. But all this research and development has been distilled and refined into a set of core drivers, again, which Dave touched on, which provide meaning to our view of the world, and most importantly, influence our actions. As I said before, this webinar is not really suitable to discuss in detail the data, but we're quite happy to do it with anybody who wants to assess the difference between psychology and neuroscience, left brain and right brain, front and rear lobes, and all that sort of thing. So if that's what you want to do, let us know and we're happy to arrange it. So, what are these core drivers that we've identified? The 4 core business persona drivers. The first one, which you can see, is hero. The hero is focused on winning and is likely to push people to achieve what they want to achieve. They tend to be the alpha leaders where winning is paramount. And it probably goes without saying that they're likely to be highly competitive. The second one is explorer. And explorer is focused on careful planning. They're very methodical and systems driven. In the old terminology, they're the classic completer finishers. They tend to cross the T's and dot the I's. The third one is the angel. An angel is very much a team player. They love pulling together and pushing together in a common cause, and that's what really drives them. And finally, we have discoverer. The discoverer has a very inquiring mind, is very much focused on learning, and they get a lot of their motivation from finding new ways of doing things. They tend to be very innovative in their thinking. Now, please bear in mind, ladies and gentlemen, what I've just given you is a summary. It's important to remember about these 4 drivers is that they're actually all within us all. But as we grow up and develop, one driver is likely to become more dominant than the others. But of course, that doesn't mean that we can't do the others. So for instance, in my case, my dominant driver, as Dave said, is discoverer. I tend to have lots of ideas. I'm quite innovative and I like to find different ways of doing things. I like to challenge the status quo and question it. But I also spent quite a long time working for Nielsen, the marketing research and global information company, where I had to process and analyze business data, which obviously required my explorer skills to come to the fore. And because I'm quite innovative, I have to call on the hero element of my character when I'm trying to persuade colleagues about one of my new ideas. And obviously here at Riddlebox, I'm part of a very tight team where we all have to be angels and pull together in a common cause. And I think as Dave mentioned, within our team, we have a very strong hero, Jeremy, another discoverer, Ram, and our managing director, Martin, is very much an explorer. And Dave, I think as you said before, your dominant driver is explorer too, isn't it?
Yeah, that's right, Nick. And it's funny, when I was an executive at my last career, I'd have guys coming through my door giving me blue sky thoughts and expecting a decision on the back of it with no data to support it.
Yeah, absolutely.
And of course, those guys 9 times out of 10 left with no decision or go away and bring me more data. So naturally, I want to try, emotionally I do make a decision, but I have to de-risk it based on my behaviour, my behavioural traits. That's just part of me.
And I'm the guy that's going to push those ideas at you. So, that's right. So, you see, unlike Myers Briggs, the Riddlebox business persona accommodates the fact that we're emotional beings. And and our behaviour can change and frequently does. Incidentally, it's worth noting at this stage that every effective team has all these elements in it to one degree or another. Interestingly, and I suppose fairly obviously, if you think about it, the predominant characteristics of team members will vary according to the task they're undertaking or the business that they're in. For instance, if you have a team of research scientists, you are unlikely to be particularly effective if you're all predominantly heroes like Jez. Equally, if you're a marketing team working on the launch of a new product, you're going to need a healthy dose of discoverers. But equally, in both cases, you will need angels or explorers, or at least people who are fulfilling those functions. Incidentally, as you know, when you signed up for this webinar, you were offered, and most people, I'm pleased to say, accepted an invitation to get their business persona profile done. So, you might be interested to know that the makeup of the audience on this call is as follows. We've got heroes at 20%, explorers 48%, angels 16%, and discoverers 16%. Obviously, that's a huge oversimplification because it just shows the dominant drivers and doesn't show the order or predominance of the other drivers that we've all got. So, if you are an explorer, beware, because Dave is likely to want to bond with you in the near future.
Well, that's true, but it's actually interesting because throughout my career, I've actually been, highly motivated and excited when working more with discoverers and heroes.
It's all part of the teamwork.
Right, so, and hence why I'm likely to spend more time with you, Nick, and Jez, and less with Martin, right?
Well,
he's an explorer too. But, so in a team, you always find there's people with different predominant personas that really motivate you to excel.
Well, that's interesting because that actually comes on to another key characteristic of the business persona now is you were stating there how you were perceived or how you think you're perceived. And one of the key differences with the Riddlebox business persona is the ability to incorporate different circumstances and emotions into how people are feeling. And it's what we call the alternate dimension perspective. What we mean by alternate is that not only does the assessment profile show an individual, as you were saying, Dave, the predominance or otherwise of the four core drivers within his or her makeup, but also, and crucially, how they are perceived by others. So, for instance, it's all very well that somebody might be assessed as having predominantly hero characteristics, which we know some people have, which might incidentally make them feel good about themselves, but it could be that their hero is actually perceived by those around them as being arrogant and overbearing, to the detriment of the team as a whole. Someone who is an angel, in other words, a first-rate team player, may be viewed by colleagues as too acquiescent and therefore undervalued. In both cases, the perception of the individual by others will affect the efficiency of the team and probably decrease the enjoyment of working in the team for all the members involved. And because these perceptions and feelings have been recognised, it's then possible to map out how those behaviours can be changed to alter those unhelpful perceptions. Dave, I know this alternate aspect of the BP is something your clients find quite helpful, isn't it?
Yeah, my clients do, and I personally think that the most powerful thing, especially if you're a team leader, an executive, or somebody that aspires or is upwardly mobile in an organisation, having a perspective, an alternate perspective on how people view you, that is different to the way you view yourself, is a very powerful weapon which you can decide to use or decide not to use. For example, I talked about my risk-taking behaviour. I need to support. I'm not a great risk taker. I want to mitigate risk, but in some situations, people will look at me as very, very conservative. Now that could be okay in certain situations, but in other situations, I may want to dispel that. I may want to act. If it's what an actor does,
yeah.
Right, an actor they're not acting themselves, or well, some actors are, but many actors, the best actors, are obviously acting a different persona. And so there are circumstances where you want to act differently than you would normally would.
Yes.
And knowing how and when to do that, I think, is, the art of great leaders and people that become executives in organisations.
No, absolutely. And I'm sure we can all think of how effective the Riddlebox business persona could be as a leadership and business performance tool, as you mentioned. But I believe it could also have significant impact in some less obvious areas. For instance, in my working career, I spent a lot of years in the corporate relocation industry, and I know what a perennial area of concern is the issue of failed relocations. In other words, someone is relocated to carry out a specific function, but then packs it in early and goes home or moves on somewhere else. It's a disaster from the employer's or the business's point of view, firstly from a business perspective, because it means that they need to find someone else to fulfill that role. And secondly, because corporate relocation is extremely expensive, particularly if you're moving someone to a different country. And that represents money down the drain. Now, business persona would be able to indicate how an individual is likely to respond to the challenges of a relocation. It would provide HR with an early warning of possible complications and provide a steer on how much support that individual may require. And if similar information were available on the individual's spouse, which can also cause a relocation to fail, so much the better.
More than the individual themselves, I imagine.
In some cases, yes. And also, if HR know the business persona of the team that the individual is going to join, they will have useful information about how he or she is going to fit in from a purely work point of view. Now, it's important to remember that the business persona profiling process is a very positive one. It presupposes, because it's actually true, that basically anyone can do anything. But it also recognizes that everyone has dominant core drivers which affect their feelings and emotions. So, if you like, unlike Myers Briggs, which tends to be quite prescriptive in that it categorizes you as one particular profile or another, Riddlebox business persona accommodates the fact that your behavior can change, which means, of course, that you can initiate change yourself, which is what you were talking about, Dave, if you want to. For instance, if you discover that the perception that other people have of you is incorrect. And of course, as previously stated, because this process is essentially a positive one, people are much more receptive to the messages that it provides than might otherwise be the case if the conclusions that were presented in no way represents how people are feeling. Approaching profiling in this way enables a much more harmonious and therefore productive working environment to be established. It means that the work experience can be much more fulfilling, and as we all know, creating a powerful and positive employee experience is the single most influential factor in achieving outstanding organisation performance and ultimately competitive advantage, which in simple terms means more profit. So back to where we were, our aims. We've talked about assessing the existing workforce and their environment and improving what's there, and obviously other aspects of measuring what's going on to sustaining the improvement. Using business persona, we can assess the individuals and go about improving what's there, importantly, in a collaborative, cooperative, and a positive way. So wouldn't it be great if we could actually measure this experience objectively and provide us with worthwhile benchmarks? Well, guess what? We can. So as well as our business persona, we have developed the Riddlebox Experience Score, which is another brilliant innovation from our founders, Ram and Jez. And we've developed a process and methodology which can sustain the improvements achieved, and it's called the Riddlebox Pulse, which enhances the benefits of the Riddlebox toolkit into an ongoing process to ensure continuous business improvement and performance. But maybe they should be the subject for future webinars, Dave. Certainly not this one. Anyway, that's enough from me. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. I hope you found that of interest.
Well, thanks very much, Nick. Before I take some questions, and there's a couple that have come in, Jez has been very quiet here, and I saw him noting down a few things. So, were there any specific observations that you wanted to add to what Nick said?
I think Nick hit the nail on the head. He said the most important thing is it's a positive experience to start with. Because the trouble with traditional psychometrics is they're rather prescriptive. You're a something, and it doesn't leave much scope for development. Whereas the whole point of this is it's when you understand the lens through which you see the world and how others see it, and then how you could the alternative perspective, it gives you scope to develop. So for me, it's everything has to pass the so what test and what's in it for me, and that's very important.
Okay, thank you. Sorry, I was just trying to do something else at the same time there, and I can't do two things at once, like most men. Thank you, Jez. I do have a couple of questions. One here, I have the first one, and please, now would be a good time to put forward other questions. So if you have access to your IM through WebEx, then please type your question, and we'll get one of the two guys here to answer it for you. But the first one from Amy. Thanks, Amy. Morning. Welcome to the call again. Does the business persona profile that I have completed show my alternate perspective that you talked about?
Yes,
no, it doesn't. But we have the data. What we provide is just the most basic profile, because beyond there's a whole load of reports we can do. And just a tiny bit more on the alternate perspective.
Yeah.
The way to describe it is to get a scale from, let's say, 0 to 100, and 50 therefore being the middle point. If I was to ask you, say, Dave, and genuinely, would you consider yourself assertive or not? Where would you put yourself?
Yeah, in some situations, 65 to 70% assertive. Yeah, so.
Yeah, which as a leader of business would probably be quite normal.
Yeah.
But if it was say 85, 90, at what point does assertive become overbearing or even bullying?
Yes.
So likewise, someone says, "I'm a great team player."
Dictatorial.
Exactly.
Right.
And if someone is saying, "I'm a great team player, I always go along with guys," well, at what point is that just weak? And this is the concept of bipolars, and it's actually quite a complex scale, and it's very mathematical. And that's what drives it. Again, that's not in time for now. But it's not just a finger in the air. It is a genuine assessment of how, number one, you do yourself, but how you may be seen, not always seen, how may be seen by others. And I think if you really care about people and working in a team, that's a vital piece of information which traditional psychometrics don't provide. Because they fall into this reductionist philosophy of trying to reduce you to a something. Yeah. You're a plant or a resource gatherer or an ENTJ. You're a something. But so what? And that's to me where they fail and where we really take it on to the next stage.
I think the point to emphasise, Jez, on this ultimate thing is it's most powerful in a team environment.
Absolutely. So absolutely. Well, by yourself.
If you're thinking of using BP on a team, that's really when you see the power of the dimension come through. So, and we'd be happy to show you that.
Well, yeah, I'll give you an example. If I were leading a team of heroes, I wouldn't be saying things like, "Let's all collaborate on this decision, and we'll all get together and we'll pool our resources and we'll make a committee decision." I'd be saying, "These are the goals. That's the hill that we're going to take. First one to the top wins, right? Hit the goal, and leave a trail of disruption in your way, right?"
Yes.
And conversely, if I were with a team of angels, I'd be using the collaborative and
exactly
combined decision making and all of those. So finding those perspectives is key to me in driving a team and understanding the team and ultimately dynamics of the team to get the most out of it.
Yeah, absolutely.
But just building on that, while heroes are busy taking hills, discoverers will find a better way to take it. And explorers will plan the process with a lot more efficiency, while heroes are just eager to run out the door and just get on with it.
Smash through the wall.
Exactly. The key thing is it needs all four. It needs a balanced team.
Okay, great. Thank you. There's some other questions coming in. So let me just get on top of these. There's a question here from Alan. Thanks, Alan. Good morning. Welcome to the call. Whilst understanding yourself and how others perceive you is essential for both personal and organisational development, this in itself does not encourage engagement. So how do you believe this can be encouraged?
Engagement is a result of experience. And this is the key thing, that feelings drive everything. And so if you're in a team and you're not appreciated, your experience is going to be a negative one, basically. Now I know I tease you a lot about this, Dave, because you're an explorer and I'm not. Of all the things I could be, that would be my weakest element. Yeah. So I tease you about how, I mean,
we should
have a film here. Everything that's I even look next door, there's a planning chart, and I would never do these things. But the fact that I can actually have a dialogue with you pulls your leg, and I hope you feel appreciated. Because I think I would never be like you, but I wish I could be. And so that creates a more positive experience. When there's a good experience, then you therefore get good engagement. See, engagement's really a behavioural thing, and it's that feeling that drives our behaviour. So that's why you've got to go upstream, and that's why emotions are everything. Does that answer the question, do you think?
I hope it does for Alan. One of the other questions that came in from Martin, which I will just table at this point, and then we'll come back to any other question that we've had, is how can I take this forward? So business persona is something that I'm interested in, or some of the other elements of today's discussion. How can I take this forward with True Talent Matters or Riddlebox?
Get in touch.
Yeah. Absolutely. I mean, obviously, we're following up on this, contacting people who come on this call. And that would be the time to say that, particularly if you're interested in the ultimate dimension as well, then we wanted to talk to you about a team, because that's where you see the power of people. Yeah. And also, we could then start to touch on the other things that we mentioned at the end, like the experience score and Little Box Pulse.
If we go back to emotions, what we're hoping to do is spark interest and curiosity. And if people are just curious about how this can be applied into their business or their life, that's one level of interest. Yeah. If people are just purely just fascinated about the more geeky side of it, the more scientific side of it, we can ask those questions as well.
Yes.
So I mean, we're basically approachable to anybody
who's interested. So here's somebody who's interested. Nice radio segue there. Nice link. Maggie, morning Maggie. Good to hear from you. Where would a strengths finder type of profile come into the mix? ? MBTI psychometric, Riddlebox emotional, ... That was exactly what she wrote.
Strength finder. What's the best way to describe that? Again, it's rooted in a very much dated philosophy and a dated process. Strength finder, again, one thing you should never do is knock other products.
No, of course not.
Strength finders has served very well, the same as Myers Briggs has. But I just don't think it goes deep enough. It's not enough to say, well, your strengths are X, Y, and Z. Because it doesn't, number one, it doesn't provide an alternate perspective. Number two, it avoids this, where we like to come from is this idea of transcend but include. So, whilst you may have these strengths and you see the world through this lens, I think that takes on to the next stage. If we're not asking that as well as I want to do. Let's just say your strength was communication. Great, that's a fantastic strength to have.
Yeah.
But if you're communicating only through the lens of an explorer, you're not going to communicate well to a hero and an angel discoverer.
Right.
And so it takes it to the next level. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that makes complete great communicators have a certain behavioural type, or
the great leaders and great orators always connect with an emotional level.
yes,
So if I said to you, what do you do? Well, I run a recruitment agency. And then you'll tell me how you did it. I studied, recruitment. I worked very hard, and I love my job. A great orator would say, what do you do, Dave? I love what I do so much. You'd want my job. You didn't tell me what you do, and I'm already interested.
right,
So it feels your emotions first.
yeah.
And then you tell me how you do it and then what you do.
Brilliant, thanks. A quick question here from Carol. Morning, Carol. Can I share my BP on social media?
Yes, sure. I wish you would. No, I think that.
I thought I'd read that out for you because I think I knew the answer.
I think everybody should have it on their LinkedIn profile there. I think everybody should have an office door. If you've got an office.
Right.
So it gives you a great clue. Before you walk through here, this is the lens through which I see the world. You would benefit from knowing this piece of information.
You're just seeing a line of tattoos here as well.
Well, when you think about it, it would make sense. Nick, you're a discoverer. If I come in here and I start trying to appeal to your curiosity, first of all, we're going to have a great conversation.
Yeah, that's right.
So, Carol, I would say resounding yes, please do. A couple of other questions. Alan is back. Thanks, Alan. Another point. How do you feel about collective group BP for collectives, such as classifying HR directors, finance directors, sales directors, etc.? Classic stereotypes, of course, but from a generalisation point, can tools approaches like this measure and report upon job roles?
Yes, I'm nervous about this point about stereotypes. That's actually a key point. It's not enough to say, well, HR, they must all be angels, surely, and chief executives must all be heroes, and that's not the point. Because you can do any function through any lens. It's just your approach will differ. So I sort of see that in 2 points. One is don't avoid stereotypes. I would use that as a selection criteria. But what I would say is if the task we're about to undertake requires more, a different type, then that's the sort of person you go for. So it should be more task. The task should drive who you would want on your team, not the function.
Okay. Yeah. Yes, and of course, Alan, we'll be in touch with you. So we'd love to explore all of that with you in more detail.
It's a very good point. It's a very good question.
Yeah, thank you. Final question, and that's from Guy. Thanks, Guy. Good morning. Most HR directors have strong opinions on psychometric profiling. What triggers are likely to prompt them to explore others, such as this one?
Now, you would read my paper. You read my paper about HR and neuroscience. I'm going to be controversial here, and why not? Because no one can hear me. If I had to characterise the HR fraternity, by and large, they are risk adverse. I think, and it was a very senior HR director, in fact, who gave me this feedback. They have, and their job should be far more through the resources of the business, where a lot of the time their job is just to stay out of trouble. And so they're risk adverse, they want to avoid trouble. And they're very defensive and protective about past psychometric tools. Because in all honesty, their children are ugly. There's no point going on to all that stuff for 30 years is a waste of time. And that's the danger of trying to challenge anybody in HR. And so you're pressing against a very closed door. And as a fraternity, and this is a sweeping statement, they've been very slow to embrace neuroscience. And there's no secret why there are very few HR people on the main board of companies. Why do you have a finance director, an ops director? All the major functions are represented on the main board of a company. Rarely is an HR director on the main board. Now, it's controversial, but the reason they're not, they don't deserve to be. That's the honest truth. Because HR should be the sexiest function in any organisation. Yeah. It should be the one, if everyone says the biggest asset in a business are people, right?
And employee engagement is at the forefront of everybody's minds, right?
And I wrote my MBA thesis on this. Surely understanding people is fundamental to business strategy. So why isn't the HR director the most important person on the board of the company? And so I knew this would sort of stir. I'm probably going to get hate mail now. But you know, you've got to ask yourself honest questions. And I said in the paper I wrote, it's the component at this moment. You know? Yeah. The sun doesn't orbit around us, we orbit around the sun. We need to think differently.
Great. Well, with that, thanks, Guy. I really appreciate you throwing the cat, or allowing us to throw the cat amongst the pigeon. Forward.
Well, that's probably going to get a response.
Yeah. But in closing, I just wanted to draw your attention to something else that we've just put up on the slide deck. Would you just like to summarise?
Certainly, yes. The webinar has got CPD accreditation because, as well as talking about BP, we've covered a lot of subjects which are fairly new, and hopefully you will have learned something, and that deserves accreditation. So part of the follow-up process when we give you access to the slides, we'll also contact you and tell you how to get your CPD certificate. And equally, we are recording this, and we'll give you access to the recording. So if you want to show this recording to colleagues, then if they look at it and send us their email address, then we can get CPD certificates to them as well.
Great, fantastic. Well, with that, and given that it's coming up for 9:15, I would like to thank you all again for attending and for the good range of questions that we had. And I'll wish you a very good St. David's Day for those that are celebrating. And
not after the weekend.
We'll be in touch, or get in touch with us. And as Nick just said, we will put the recordings up on the web page so you can go back there. And thanks once again. Very good morning.